I think I would say Gatsby comes off as maybe a bit more admirable than Tom or Daisy because he earned his wealth to some extent. Like he's a bit of a rags to riches story. He didn't inherit his money the way that Tom and Daisy did.
Right.
And that's even though he earned his money kind of illegitimately, illegally by being a bootlegger, it still makes him like somewhat more admirable. I think through Tom or through Nick's perspective, at least.
Yeah, and I guess that could go back to why does Nick admire Gatsby, even though at the very beginning, in the first chapter, he says that he stands for everything that Nick hates. Why is Nick so fascinated with him?
The one thing he says he really admires about Gatsby is his optimism, right?
Right.
So there's a kind of like American optimism that's at times probably just ignorant of reality, and you have that I think with Gatsby.
I guess so. I think that's kind of also the central message. Like you said, it is an American novel, and I guess Gatsby is kind of set up to be that American dream. The idea that you can just start from nothing, start poor, and literally remake yourself to be whatever you want to be. And I think Fitzgerald's opinions on that are extremely clear because in the end Gatsby is killed. And I think that like it's probably like the very first lesson you hear about this when you read it in high school, that The Great Gatsby is about the death of the American dream. It's the old money is going to continue to rule. It's going to continue to be careless, and it's going to continue to just kind of eat anything that gets into its way. And there's always going to be people like Tom and Daisy, and there's always going to be the rest of us who suffer in whatever kind of poverty we have.
Yeah, I mean, American society, nearly 100 years later, we still have that de facto American aristocracy that Tom and Daisy would be a part of. I remember back in like 2008, we had the housing market crash, stock market crash, right. The Great Recession, right? And people were talking about, is the American dream dead? But nearly 100 years before that, Fitzgerald had wrote that it had already died, or it had become something extremely ugly, right? That it was a foul dust that preyed upon people in the wake of their dreams and killed them.
Yeah.
Like that the American dream kills Gatsby. The American dream is its excess and it's ugly and it's greed and it's enough money to buy expensive cars and all the whiskey you need to crash them all.
Exactly. And I mean, I guess beyond money, those are the truly like American values. It is strange to like read this and think this was literally 100 years ago, because if you took out a lot of the like little references to prohibition and world wars, this could be a present day novel. There are still people living extreme lives of luxury, probably even more so these days. There's still careless people in parties and pretty much everything the book describes. I guess it's even like alarming now to think like where we are in 2017, like we pretty much hit like the pinnacle of it, of celebrity and carelessness and like whatever the opposite of the American dream could be. Like I think I read a piece on probably the State or Slate or something that literally said with all the new administration and like executive orders and things coming out that like it just straight up said the American dream is dead. Like, when we are not accepting people into the country, the American dream is dead. And it's just very odd, like, reading back to these things. I mean, I've read other things in history that say that America is simply an empire, and empires rise and they fall. And I guess it could be argued that even back in the 20s, you could see the fall coming. Or that might have been the turning point, when we went from, I guess what you could call a meritocracy, to just complete, I guess, capitalistic ruin.
Yeah, no, in that way the book reads as very prophetic.
Yeah, I would think so. And, I mean, I found the whole time when I was reading this, I read it in 2 sittings, I think. You told me that we were going to talk about this book, and I sat down at a local coffee shop for about 4 hours, and read through probably 80% of it, and then the next day finished it up in about an hour. And I feel like the entire time I read it, the biggest thing I got from it was just sad. And like I said, I guess it's because I've just been, like, now more than ever, like, reading these characters. There's no one good here. Like, the reason that these characters are all unlikable, criticism is bad, isn't because it's not true. Like, each character in this book, you have excellent reasons to hate them. But, like I said at the beginning, I think that's the kind of poignant part of the book, is seeing them in yourself and seeing their world kind of reflected in ours. Like, it's I don't know how you could come away with anything but sadness from reading it.
So is there any argument, and we can ask this question, I suppose, to the reader, to the listeners as well, that this book in any way can be read as optimistic? Because to me, I wouldn't say that the book is pessimistic, but it is a sad read. I would say the book is realistic, but it is a depressing read. But I wouldn't say it's pessimistic.
I guess so. I think that, I mean, it does feel like a very realistic piece of literature. But once you get past the flowery prose, nothing in it feels like something that couldn't happen. I mean, and in that way, I guess it does feel realistic, and that just kind of contributes to it feeling sad, because you start to realize, like, this is realistic, and it's not the book that's sad, it's like the world we live in that's sad. Like, we still exist in this place. This isn't like an incredibly, like, fantastical fiction. It's pretty grounded.
Yeah, it is.
And so I think that's the part that's sad. It's not reading about shitty people doing shitty things. The sad part is realizing that 100 years on, people are still doing shitty things.
That was my biggest criticism of, like, the remake that they made in, what was it, 2015?
Oh, with, like, Leonardo DiCaprio and stuff?
Yeah, is that it seemed, so many of the scenes visually with the production value were so fantastical that it didn't seem realist at all. You forget that this was something that was supposed to be, like, taking place 100 years ago.
Right. I mean,
in the real world.
I feel like that's probably kind of something you just have in cinema, is because it's such a visual medium. It's easy to take things and just be like, well, let's just make them as visually impressive as possible. But I 100% agree. Like, that movie completely misses the mark. This is a dark, sad book about awful, awful people. Like, I don't think even you can show Gatsby as a protagonist. I don't think you can show Nick as a protagonist.
Well, Nick, yeah, that's a good question. So, who is the protagonist in this book, Nick or Gatsby?
I mean, the title of it is Gatsby.
The Great Gatsby. I would say he's the protagonist, and I would say he's the hero in maybe, like, the Greek tragedy sense of a hero, and that he's fatally flawed.
Right.
And I would say, Nick is the narrator and a character, but not necessarily the protagonist.
I don't think there is the protagonist. Yeah, I couldn't say that Nick's the protagonist. It seems like, I guess like you said earlier, Gatsby really is the only person that you could even kind of admire, because he earned his money, and he's not actively doing terrible things with it. He's obviously misguided and obsessed, but, I mean, that's kind of also what we see in ourselves and what we see in the American dream. And I think it's that obsession is supposed to kind of resemble the dream itself. And one of the questions that I had right when I finished the book, my last couple notes were some of the quotes of "they were careless people," and then that last one about beating on, born back ceaselessly into the past. But my last note just says, does Nick change? Because I kept thinking that through the whole thing. I thought, to have a good story, at least in the mythical sense, the hero's journey, you have to have a hero who starts somewhere, who experiences a new environment, who changes, and then who returns changed. And I don't think anyone in this book changes.
I don't think so either. And here's the thing. For me, Nick is a surrogate for the readers, and Gatsby's life is a parable. And it's a question of, does Nick learn from Gatsby's life as a parable, and do the readers learn from Gatsby's life as a parable? So for me, I would say, like, the question of, is Gatsby great? There's only one answer that isn't completely like misinformed or uninformed or misguided or the result of lazy thinking. It's yes and no.
Right.
Yes, he's great in that he's a compelling, interesting character. No, in that he's fatally flawed, right? He romanticizes the past. He's obsessed with reliving it.
Hmm.
And there is a greatness in that there's a grandness and scale to the rise and fall of Jay Gatsby.
Right. In the same way that empires that have risen and fallen are great. And